Working as a food delivery driver has its ups and downs. Sometimes it's easygoing, other times it's stressful, but generally everything follows the usual flow. You pick up the order, drive to the address, deliver it, and move on to the next one. That night, I was already tired, almost finishing my shift, when I received one last order. Something about it made me uncomfortable from the start. It was an address I had never seen before. The street name seemed new, but the neighborhood was old. One of those places filled with old, poorly lit houses. You know, the kind of neighborhood where the streets are poorly marked and the lighting is sparse, which already makes you feel a bit uneasy. I confirmed the order on the app. A large pizza, nothing unusual, and followed the GPS directions. At first, the route was like any other, but as I got closer to the address, the surroundings began to change. The houses seemed older, more spread out, and the street grew darker. The streetlights were weak, almost non-existent. I arrived at the indicated address and parked in front of a house that looked completely abandoned. The paint was peeling, the windows were covered with heavy curtains, and the only light came from a nearby street lamp, flickering and casting dark shadows across the yard. I looked at the app again, double-checking the address. This was the place. There was no mistake. I sighed, trying to calm myself, and grabbed the pizza box. I climbed the steps to the porch, which creaked under my feet, and rang the doorbell. Nothing. I waited for a few moments, looking around. The wind was blowing hard, making the trees sway and creating a disturbing rustling sound. I tried again, this time knocking on the door. The sound echoed through the house as if it were completely empty. That's when I heard footsteps from inside. Light, dragging footsteps, as if someone were slowly approaching. A chill ran down my spine, but I kept waiting. The doorknob turned, and the door opened with a long creak, as though it hadn't been opened in a long time. A woman appeared. She was old, very old, with a face marked by time and deep, dark eyes. She looked at me for a long time before finally speaking, her voice low and raspy. "Did you bring the pizza?" I swallowed hard, trying to ignore the discomfort the situation was causing me. "Yes, your order," I replied, holding the box out to her. She stared at me for a few more seconds, without moving. Her gaze was intense, as if she were studying me. Finally, she reached out and took the pizza, without saying a word. I was about to leave when something caught my attention. I looked at the app on my phone again, and that's when I saw it. There was no order. The screen showed that the order had been canceled. There was no record of any request coming from that address, and my history was clear. It was as if the order had never been made. My heart started beating faster. "Excuse me," I said, trying to stay calm. "It seems there's been a problem with the system. I have no record of your order." The woman kept staring at me, as if she didn't understand what I was saying. Then she smiled. A cold, emotionless smile that made my blood freeze. "I ordered, and you delivered." My hands began to tremble. Something was terribly wrong. I tried to keep my composure. I need to check the system. If there's no order, I'll have to take the pizza back. But before I could step back, she stepped forward, still with that unsettling smile. "You've already made the delivery. You can't take it back." My mind raced, trying to find a rational explanation, but the feeling that something was off was overwhelming. I needed to get out of there. "Sorry, I need to go," I muttered, turning quickly toward my car. I walked to the sidewalk as fast as I could, feeling the woman's eyes still on me. When I reached the car, I looked back at the house one last time. She was standing in the doorway, still smiling, but something had changed. The street lamp began flickering more intensely, and her shadow seemed to stretch in a distorted way. I got into the car, slammed the door, and started the engine. When I looked back at the house, she had closed the door, but the discomfort didn't fade. My heart was still racing, and I couldn't shake the thought that there had been no order. And the smile on that woman's face, I sped away from the street, trying to leave that feeling of dread behind. But as I was driving, something caught my attention. I glanced in the rearview mirror, and for a split second, I saw something that made me freeze. The house I had just left was no longer there. I've always liked the convenience of ordering food through apps. It's practical, simple, and saves me from having to cook after a long day at work. Most of the time, everything went smoothly. The orders arrived on time, and the delivery drivers were friendly, doing their job efficiently. But then, something strange started happening. It all began subtly. A delivery driver, a tall, thin man with a forced smile, started showing up frequently with my orders. First, I didn't think much of it. Maybe he was just the closest or the one available in that area. After all, the app usually assigns drivers based on location. But over time, I noticed it was always the same guy. Even when I ordered from different restaurants at different times, there he was. The same face, the same smile that never reached his eyes. I tried not to let it bother me, but the frequency with which he appeared started to make me uncomfortable. One day, when I ordered something late at night, he showed up again. I went to the door to receive the order, and he handed me the food with that same forced smile. This time, though, something in his expression seemed different, more intense, like he was trying to hide something. His eyes watched me in a way that made me feel exposed, as if he knew more than he should. "Good evening, here's your order," he said as usual. I took the bag and thanked him quickly, trying to end the interaction as fast as possible. But before I could close the door, he stepped forward. "You order food quite often, don't you?" he said casually, but there was something in his tone that made me freeze. Forcing a smile, I replied with a weak joke, "Yeah, I work a lot, so I don't have much time to cook." He smiled back, but this time the smile seemed predatory. "Ah, I know. What did he mean by that?" I felt the discomfort growing inside me, and before he could say anything else, I closed the door, locking it immediately. I went back to the couch, but I couldn't focus. The way he looked at me, the way he said that, stayed in my mind. That night, I barely slept. In the days that followed, I continued ordering food, trying to avoid thinking about what had happened. But to my discomfort, the same delivery driver kept showing up. I tried to ignore it, telling myself it was just a coincidence. But the frequency with which he appeared was unsettling. He always smiled the same way, that smile that seemed to hide something more. Until one night, I decided to order from a restaurant outside the city using a different app, hoping to avoid him. I waited patiently, tracking the new delivery driver's progress on the map, feeling relieved when I saw it would be someone else. However, when the doorbell rang and I opened the door, my heart nearly stopped. It was him, the same delivery driver, the same smile. "Surprised to see me?" he asked, as if he knew I had been trying to avoid him. He handed me the order with that expression that made me feel increasingly uncomfortable. I shut the door quickly, my heart pounding in my chest. How was it possible? I had used a different app, a different restaurant, a different location, and yet he still showed up. The feeling that I was being watched intensified. From that point on, I started seeing him more often, not just during deliveries. I saw him standing at the corner of my street, watching from a distance. On another occasion, I noticed him on the other side of the street as I walked home from work, just standing there, looking, not making any movement. It was as if he was everywhere. I tried calling the customer service line of the app, explaining the situation, but they assured me it was just a coincidence. There was nothing they could do to stop him from accepting my orders, and they suggested I might be overinterpreting things. But I knew it wasn't just that. Every time he appeared, the feeling that something was very wrong intensified. It was as if he knew more about me than I was comfortable with. As if he were watching me, tracking my habits, my schedule. My discomfort turned into real fear. That night, I decided to stop ordering food. It was the only way to make sure he wouldn't show up at my door anymore. For a few weeks, I kept my promise, avoiding any interaction with food delivery apps. But then, on a rainy night, laziness got the best of me. I was too tired to cook, and I thought that maybe enough time had passed. I ordered from a restaurant I had never used before, a place on the other side of the city. The food took longer than expected. The delivery time kept increasing, and the app showed that the driver was having trouble in the rain. Finally, when the notification "driver on the way" appeared, I felt a little relieved. But that relief lasted only until I heard the doorbell ring. My heart nearly jumped out of my chest. I knew something was wrong before I even opened the door. When I did, there he was, the same delivery driver, in the rain with the same smile on his face. "Good evening, I brought your order." The bag was dripping with rainwater, and it seemed like he had been waiting for this moment, as if he knew I would eventually order again. Before I could say anything, he stepped forward. "You can't avoid me forever." I slammed the door shut and locked every bolt. Panic set in. I ran to the window, but he was still there, standing in the rain, staring directly at my door, as if waiting for something. That night, I stayed awake until dawn, listening to every noise, every drop of rain hitting the window, terrified that at any moment, he might come back. And to this day, I have never ordered food delivery again. It was one of those nights when laziness wins. I had spent the whole day running errands, and by the end, the last thing I wanted to do was cook. So, like I had done countless times before, I opened the food delivery app and ordered something quick for dinner. Nothing complicated, just a simple pizza, the kind of order that usually arrives without any issues. I confirmed the order, and the estimated delivery time appeared. About 30 minutes. Everything seemed normal. I sat on the couch, turned on the TV, and continued watching a movie while I waited. I wasn't paying much attention to the time until I received the notification that the delivery driver was on his way. I looked at the app. The driver's name was Marcos, and his photo was typical, a friendly smile, the kind of person who seemed used to making deliveries. I followed his progress on the map, and everything seemed to be going smoothly. He picked up the pizza from the restaurant, got in the car, and started driving toward my house. The app showed he was about 10 minutes away. Minutes passed, and then I noticed that the icon on the map had stopped. He was on a street just a few blocks from my house, but the car simply wasn't moving anymore. I thought maybe he had made a quick stop, perhaps to check the GPS or something. I didn't worry too much. 5 minutes went by, then another 10. Marcos's car was still parked in the same spot. The discomfort started growing. I opened the app again and saw that the status remained the same. Marcos is on his way, but he wasn't moving. I decided to wait a little longer, trying to ignore the feeling that something was wrong. Maybe he was having car trouble or got lost. After nearly 30 minutes of inactivity, I decided to send him a message. I wrote something simple. "Hi, is everything okay? Do you need help finding the address?" No response. I waited a few more minutes, but still nothing. Marcos wasn't moving, and now the unease began to set in. I tried calling the contact number provided by the app. The phone rang several times, but he didn't pick up. I left a voicemail, but the sense that something was very wrong only intensified. I decided to do something I'd never done before: leave the house to see what was going on. I grabbed my car keys and drove to the location where Marcos's icon was stuck on the map. It was a regular residential street, a bit more isolated, but nothing out of the ordinary. As I approached the spot marked in the app, I started feeling an inexplicable chill. When I finally arrived at the location, I saw his car. It was parked by the sidewalk, with the lights off. The engine was silent, and the surroundings were eerily quiet. There was no one on the streets, no movement at all. It was as if time had stopped there. I parked a few meters behind and got out of my car, hesitating. The sensation of being watched was overwhelming, but there was no one in sight. I walked toward Marcos's car, expecting to find a simple explanation. Maybe he was having engine trouble or something like that. But what I found made me stop in my tracks. The car was empty. There was no sign of Marcos, nor anyone else. The doors were unlocked, and the pizza box was sitting on the passenger seat, untouched. Everything seemed in order, except for the fact that the delivery driver was nowhere to be found. He had vanished. I looked around, trying to understand what was happening. I called out his name, feeling a wave of panic rising in me, but the only response was silence. There was no indication that he had left the car, no bags, no phone, nothing. Just the car, as if he had disappeared into thin air. I rushed back to my car, now completely overtaken by fear. I called the app's customer service, explaining the situation, but they couldn't locate Marcos either. The only information they had was that he had picked up the order and was on his way, just as the app had shown. No one knew where he had gone. Back in the safety of my car, I took one last look at Marcos's car, still parked there, mysterious and silent. Something about that place didn't feel right. It was as if the street was shrouded in some kind of invisible darkness. Something I couldn't quite understand, but I could feel it deeply. I drove home, locking all the doors and windows. There was nothing more I could do, except try to forget what had happened. But that night didn't leave me in peace. Days later, I received a notification from the app that the delivery had been canceled. They apologized for the incident and offered a refund. No mention of Marcos, no explanation of what had happened to him. And to this day, whenever I order food through the app, I keep an eye on the map, carefully watching the driver's icon move. Always afraid that, at some point, it will stop and never move again.